What is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 happened? This is fan fiction. Ding! One of my favorite movie trilogies has to be Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. It's one of my favorite movies from my childhood, and I remember watching all 3 movies. Even though I'm not a fan of the 3rd movie, I was a major fan of the first 2 films in the franchise. Not the 3rd film. The 3rd film in the franchise was bad and just flat out horrible. In my opinion, something better could have happened. Maybe we could have had maybe we could have a Peter, MJ, and Gwen Stacy love triangle. Something better than that one symbiote dance we got in the first Spider-Man movie. Dun dun dun. Here's how I think a Sam Raimi Spider-Man 4 could have happened. Dun dun dun. We start off with John Jameson 2 years after Spider-Man 3. Remember how he returned home and got attacked by the symbiote, which caused him to panic and scream in terror. He's been locked up in Now, I'm not going to do the raft, because that's not a prison, basically. We pick up with John Jameson 2 years after Spider-Man 3. He's locked up in Ravencroft prison for telling a story of an alien monster attacking him when he returned home from his long leave in outer space. Everyone on his crew just laughed, calling him a nutcase, and said that he deserved to be locked in a nut house. And even his father, J. Jonah Jameson, obliges, saying that his son may be a high-ranking officer in the space military in the astronaut world, but in his opinion, his son had gone through a few insane patches after the death of his mother. Yes, 2 years after this, J. Jonah Jameson's wife had died. I'm gonna give it 2 years, give or take, but his wife has died. when we open up with Peter's narration. Peter's narration is similar to his narration in Spider-Man 3, except for one thing. He talks about how revenge can turn you into a poison. After that, we see Peter swinging through a city. And after that, he visits Harry in a hospital after the events of Spider-Man 3 and a new Goblin incident. Peter visits Harry as the two apologize for everything that happened. Harry apologizes to Peter, saying if he's still marrying MJ, he would love to be his best man at his wedding. Peter says him and MJ are back together and will be getting married the day after Harry gets out of prison. Harry and Peter share a confident smile as the Spider-Man music plays on screen. The movie logos would stay the same, with the Sony logo flashing on screen. The Sony logo, the Columbia, and Sony logos flash on screen, with the Marvel Studios logo also flashing on screen. Now this won't be part of Disney's Spider-Verse with Tom Holland. This is set in a completely parallel reality far away from Tom Holland and his Spider-Man trilogy. This is set back in the time of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is not even set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is set in the timeline of Sony's Spider-Verse. As the Sony and the Sony, Columbia, and the in association with Marvel logos flash on screen. We then have the music done by Danny Elfman, and the cast appear. Tobey Maguire and Kristen Dunst return to reprise their roles of Peter and Mary Jane Watson. As Ian Ziering returns to reprise his role as Harry Osborn. And we have a surprising return to the Spider-Man franchise with Alfred Molina as Doc Ock. We get a surprising return of Molina after Spider-Man 2. Because like everyone else, I thought Doc Ock died at the end of Spider-Man 2. As we would also have the directed by Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi would return to not really do any directing, but he did return to write the script. Sam Raimi returned to write the script, as Mark Webb, who was more associated with the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy, was called in by Sony to write the project. Mark Webb would not return for this film. Instead, Sam Raimi would return to handle the script writing process as he directed the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy that was a bomb. Meanwhile, we have Peter visiting John Jameson in prison and Ravencroft because, believe it or not, the two used to be friends in his past. He told him that Mary Jane didn't deserve him, and he said he was correct. With his astronaut career, it would complicate their marriage. Saying in words that it would complicate their marriage too much, and his mother didn't even like him marrying Mary Jane Watson, who was a journalist and the daughter of and the girlfriend, ex-girlfriend of one of her husband's employees. Now we see Peter still working for the Daily Bugle as Jameson, returning as Al Simmons, pats him on the back. He calls in Elizabeth Brandt and tells her, get a picture of me and Peter. This will be tomorrow's headline. Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, husband and wife. We then cut to Gwen Stacy, who's returning on an express train from her time overseas. Her and Peter were once close. Yes, I am adding Mary Jane Watson into this movie. I'm adding Gwen Stacy into this film only for two reasons. One, because I don't know if Gwen Stacy died in this timeline or not. And two, I don't know what happened to her in this timeline. So I'm predicting her and Peter used to be really close when they were in middle school, but right after Gwen Stacy had to move to finish school in another country, him and Mary Jane met. And fell deeply in love. That's how I think it happened. Even though Peter never admitted his feeling towards Mary Jane Watson, he never really admitted his true feelings, which led to her marrying the wrong man. We see Peter reciting the same Shakespeare poem we saw him reincite in Spider-Man 2. As Spider-Man looks over a city peaceful and no longer written by crime. Peter is still thinking about Frank Marco and what his love for his daughter caused him to do. Peter can't think of this as Gwen Stacy visits him. Now, Peter thinks him and Gwen Stacy broke up because Gwen Stacy sent him a letter